What companies deserve your hard-earned dollar? Which would you want to work for? How can you know if they share your values? Just ask us. Just Capital is a nonprofit that tracks who really means business in supporting workers, customers, communities, the environment, and shareholders. We measure progress, track success, and help them be better. When you see the Just Capital seal, you know what's real, because just business is better business. Visit justcapital.com to learn who makes your dollar count.
Good afternoon. We are doing it live right here in the 4 o'clock hour, Mottek On Money. Get right to it with a news-driven hour. Doing more in 2024, as we've been telling you, now at 4 in the afternoon. Mottek On Money, live here in 790 KBC. Streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com. And your on-demand Mottek On Money podcast at kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Record-shattering day for the stock market with artificial intelligence giant NVIDIA back in the spotlight. Stocks surging today with the Dow and the S&P 500 hitting record highs. The NASDAQ now just a whisker shy of its first record close since 2021. All this after NVIDIA's blowout earnings news. The Dow coming in for a closing gain of 457 points today. The S&P 500 up 105, and the NASDAQ jumped 461 points. Briefly moved into record high territory. Last seen since November of 2021. It's been an exciting week. It's been a wild week, actually, with NVIDIA certainly taking the spotlight. Coming in with blowout results, NVIDIA shares moving up, get this, $110 and change to $785.38. A big jump there of about 16.5%. And very, very big news here. We'll be joined shortly by Art Hogan to talk about that. We did get new readings on the economy today. It looks like unemployment lines got a bit shorter this past week to a 5-week low of 201,000. And it looks like the purchasing manager's reading for manufacturing showed the economy likely continued to expand at an above-average rate this month. Also on the real estate scene, existing home sales rose more than 3% and climbed to the highest level since August as buyers seized on lower mortgage rates, although mortgage rates did tick higher this past week as those bond yields continue to move up. The yield on the 10-year note is now up to 4.33%. Wasn't all rainbows and ice cream cones, though, on Wall Street with shares of Rivian, that's the EV truck maker. Stock plunged about 26% today, more than a quarter of its value lost after reporting a larger than expected quarterly loss in its earnings news today. Taking a look at what else is happening, of course, with crime running rampant here in the Los Angeles area. We're watching the race for Los Angeles County District Attorney very closely. We have about a dozen candidates vying to replace the soft-on-crime incumbent George Gascon. Coming up, I'll be speaking live to another one of the candidates in the L.A. County District Attorney's race, and that is current violent crime Los Angeles Deputy DA Eric Siddall. He participated in the recent United Chambers of Commerce of the San Fernando Valley L.A. County DA Candidates Forum, which I moderated last week. He's a violent crime prosecutor and current Deputy L.A. County DA. Eric Siddall will be joining me live later this hour. And coming up, the recent storm, some homes and businesses were severely damaged. Damage assessment continues today. What happens when a property is red tagged? What happens to the value and the taxes and the whole works? Is there any relief in those situations? I'll talk about that, and I'll talk about it with L.A. County Assessor Jeffrey Prang coming up live later this hour. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy. Joining us live now, one of the biggest names on Wall Street on this big day. Big on the financial channels and a longtime contributor to this program. Joining us live now, Art Hogan, Chief Market Strategist at B. Riley Wealth Management, based here in Los Angeles. Art Hogan, thank you very much for coming to the line here this afternoon.
Frank, always a pleasure to be with you, especially on a day where a couple of the big three indices were able to make a new high.
Yeah, tell us about that big record-shattering day with NVIDIA and AI taking the spotlight again here. Art, take it from the top and give us your assessment of things here today.
Yeah, I would tell you three things about that, Frank. So first and foremost, NVIDIA clearly has been the early winner in this AI revolution, and they're the early winner because they're the first to monetize in any real size the shift to the computing power that we need for AI business models across a broad spectrum of industries. So they have the chips that everyone needs, and they continue to blow out earnings expectations. This is the sixth spectacular quarter in a row where they've just absolutely surpassed the best and the most aggressive analyst estimates for what they can actually sell and how much they can make on that. They had their margins go up. They beat on sales. They beat on earnings. They announced a stock buyback. and they clearly continue to see a very long runway in front of them in terms of demand for computing power, and computing power that is going to only increase as everyone wants to incorporate artificial intelligence into their company's business plans. So the second thing is that coming into this earnings reporting for NVIDIA, the stock had pulled back a bit, about 10% in the 3 days preceding their report. So the setup was a bit better, meaning it wasn't trading at an all-time high when they reported, and that reaction function could be more intuitive. So after having pulled back 10%, stock rallied 16% today, and everyone's sort of running around trying to figure out just how large this total addressable market is going to be. The other important factor here is it's a very large part of both the S&P and the Nasdaq Composite. So with its weight alone and pulling the other chip makers along with it, companies like AMD for sure, and Intel and the rest of the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, you saw a lot of tech names ride the wave of better news as it pertains to AI. So clearly the AI story still has a lot of gas in the tank, and I think it continues to drive things forward here.
That is amazing. We're on the air live with Art Hogan, and it should be noted, we just saw the biggest single day of value creation in stock market history today, right, Art? NVIDIA added, about $230 billion in value, and this is one of the, I think, at the very top, the biggest single-day market cap gains ever seen.
Yeah, it certainly is. Even more amazing that this is a company that was worth just about that much money in total back in 2022. Right, so the gains that this company has made in a very short period of time are testament to what they've been able to do on the cutting edge of what companies need, what the hyperscalers need to buy in terms of semiconductor chips to actually develop a AI strategy. And I think it's just beginning here. Now, obviously, there will be competitors that try to catch up here. AMD's doing that. There will be other companies that ride on the coattails like ARM. And there are other things that you need to incorporate along with the NVIDIA chips right now. But right now, they are the hottest game in town, and they continue to outperform. It's been an exciting ride, but if you listen to Jensen, the president of NVIDIA, in the conference call, he spelled out a roadmap that speaks to years, not just quarters of growth for them. And I think that's growth for just about everybody that's involved with artificial intelligence.
Now let's take a moment to celebrate his success, really living the American dream here. Jensen Huang, is it right? The founder and CEO of NVIDIA. I understand he used to work at Denny's and came up with the idea of NVIDIA while he was working there somehow.
Yeah, nothing like that Horatio Alger story where you start from the bottom and develop some great businesses, take a lot of risk along the way, but really thinking about the future. And it's interesting that the progress that NVIDIA has made. So at the beginning of their success, they were really the go-to chips for gaming when gaming was just starting to get very hot. And then crypto came along, and the crypto miners needed more compute power, and lo and behold, NVIDIA was the go-to chip for the crypto miners. And now artificial intelligence, this next revolution that they seem to be able to grab the lead in, they've developed and are manufacturing through Taiwan Semiconductor the processing speed and the GPU that you need for artificial intelligence. So this is the third wave that he's been able to successfully ride here, and clearly is in the pole position to continue to do that for quite some time.
And that's why he's worth about $60 billion here now. Quite amazing. On the air live with Art Hogan. NVIDIA, as I mentioned, up nearly $111 today, $785. Remember, one of the big firms had a $700 price tag on it. Now it's blown past that. Where do you think this thing goes from here?
Well, it's hard to know. Obviously, the picture, the long-term picture that Jensen played out for us in the conference call speaks to a very long runway, meaning 2 or 3 years more of growth. But he also laid out the fact that there's going to be when the current version of the chip that everyone wants, the 100, switches over to the 200. That's just going to drive more incremental demand. So I think that while there might be some flattening out of margins in the next quarter, the margins are incredibly high. They came in north of 64.5. I think that you should expect for the full year that the gross margins continue to increase and revenues continue to grow. And what I really like about the story here is that they're so forthwith about exactly where they see the company going, and they certainly talk about how large they think this market can be. So if you went back 2 weeks ago when Advanced Micro Devices reported, and they put a 2026 total addressable market for their chips at something like, call it, in the neighborhood of $500 billion for them alone. And I would say that NVIDIA in the conference call just leapfrogged that and talked about $1 trillion total addressable market by 2027. So we're talking about years of growth. Obviously, there's been a lot of volatility, but clearly these guys have the lead here, and it's everybody's game to play catch up here. And certainly the good news is they're getting more throughput through Taiwan Semiconductor, so they're getting more supply, but it hasn't diminished their demand.
On there live with Art Hogan on a day in which the Dow and the S&P 500 have closed at record highs. The NASDAQ kissed record highs today, settled just below its all-time high, last seen in 2021, up nearly 500 at 16,042. Interesting that the NASDAQ has been the laggard in all of this, this record-shattering streak we've seen here in 2024. Are we getting well, let's see. We need the 40K Dow hats. We need those, and the NASDAQ now above 16,000 here. What about the NASDAQ? Are we expecting a record maybe this week here? Well, we just have another day or so here before this week is wrapped up. What's happening in the other tech names besides NVIDIA, and where does the NASDAQ go from here, Art?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember, if you look at this on a 2-year stack, Frank, and we like to take a step back and see how far they've come, and we talk about the biggest day for the NASDAQ going back to 2022. 2022 was a very tough year for the NASDAQ, right? So on a 2-year stack going back to see how far they fell during the bear market, you've got a 40%, 43% drawdown versus the S&P, which was down 25%. So for the S&P to catch up to that drawdown in 2023 and then make new highs this year, had less ground to cover. The NASDAQ's had more ground to cover to get back to its all-time high. So what's interesting to me is that it fell a whole lot further, but it's knocking on the door of making that new all-time high and surpassing that level that it saw in the 22 time frame. So I think on a 2-year stack, obviously the NASDAQ had more wood to chop, and they're slowly getting there. We're less than a percentage point from a new high, whether it happens this week or at some point in the first quarter. That likely is going to be driven by the fact that the economy continues to grow here. Demand for goods and services continue to grow. The consumer remains confident here. And as we saw with some of the economic data, the consumer remains very well employed. So I think that the fundamental backdrop for what's been driving the market is a whole lot less about whether or not the Fed's going to cut rates. It's a whole lot more about the fact that we have a steady economy that's growing above mean, likely in the 2.5% to 3% GDP growth rates in the first quarter after coming off a second half last year that was north of 3% growth rates. And that really drives revenues, and revenues drive earnings. So I think we get a market that's really been driven by fundamentals as opposed to what we thought it was going to be in January, with a market that's been driven by a Fed that may not be as aggressive with monetary policy.
Yep, certainly the spotlight has shifted off the Fed for the moment, and a lot of talk lately that the Fed might raise rates at the next meeting. Of course, we had that rally on expectations that we would soon see rates drop. We see those bond yields moving higher, mortgage rates up again this week. Art, what about the Fed's next move and where rates go from here?
Yeah, we have to get through a couple of meetings where the Fed does nothing here, and we've already had 4 meetings where they've taken a pause. We know the next move the Fed's going to make is likely to cut rates, but it's much more important to think about why they'd be cutting rates and not the when they'll be cutting rates. So we started the year thinking that March would be the first rate cut, and that's basically dissipated down at about a 5% chance. May is less likely. It looks like about a 30% chance, while June is still about a 50-50 tie. And I suspect that by the time they get to their June meeting, they're going to feel as though they're getting close enough to their 2% target on inflation that their 5.5% Fed funds rate will feel too restrictive. And I really think that's the clear message they're trying to send us. It's just trying to walk us back from the exuberance we had after the December Fed meeting and the street thinking that they may cut 6 times. The street's now perfectly aligned with where the Fed is in their dot plots, thinking that they may cut rates 3 times. If the first one happens in June, that's terrific, especially if they're doing it just to normalize rates, not because the economy is heading over a cliff, which is the normal path for monetary policy to start easing. Typically, when you see the Fed starting to ease because they're getting nervous about a slowdown in economic activity, that tends to be a precursor to recession. I think this go-round, we have a Fed that doesn't want to be overly restrictive. Hopefully, they're not going to wait too long. June is likely the month that they do it, and they're likely to get at least 75 basis points of cuts, taking us down to a 4 handle on the Fed funds rate.
On the air live with Art Hogan, and certainly we've seen quite a wild ride in the cryptos again lately, mostly on the upside with Bitcoin right now hovering back above 1,000, down about 600 here at the moment. Ethereum has also had a big pop. And what about what's happening in the crypto space since those Bitcoin ETFs came out, and your observations there and what's happening in crypto land?
Yeah, I would tell you this. The three things I think about, in terms of crypto is now that there's an ease of use, there's a whole new audience for potential crypto investors. So I think there's a lot of folks that didn't feel comfortable going through the process of buying crypto or Bitcoin on their own, and now that they can buy a spot ETF and do it right through the regular brokerage account with any of the major brokers, with the 11 or 12 ETFs that are out there and two of them that are the largest. I think that's brought in a new fan base, or at least some incremental buyers. Also, we're going through a process that's called halving, which just means the miners get half of the output that they normally would have. That's happened 3 or 4 times in the past. That typically constrains supply, so that typically is a bullish sign. That's going to happen sometime here in the spring. And the third thing is that crypto has tended to be correlated with risk assets, meaning if you look at the NASDAQ 100, the 100 largest tech companies, and if that's doing well, crypto tends to do well. So that correlation is still pretty tight. I think in general, cryptocurrencies, now that there's an ease of use, should still be looked at as an asset class very much like gold or digital gold. It should be, part of your portfolio if it helps you sleep at night, and certainly no larger than 5%. So now that retail investors can get there, and if that adoption gets there, there's still a lot more demand. And if you look at the fund flows that we've seen into these new ETFs, they've been pretty massive. So I think right now it's ease of use, but it's also the other things that come along with it, like its correlation to risk assets.
On the air live with Art Hogan, and thank you so much for being generous with your time. Art, before we let you off the hook here, Rivian down 26%. The EV makers have had a rough patch here. What about this one?
Yeah, it's the year of reckoning for EVs, and three things that sort of go into that. You've certainly got some big international and Chinese competition, right? So the Chinese automaker is going to likely be the largest of the EV global producers. Not that they'll ever show up as competition on our shores necessarily, but I would tell you that. So there's more competition there. I would say the incumbent OEMs, the Fords and the General Motors of the world, are pulling up back a bit on production because the adoption hasn't been at the pace that they thought they would see, and right now they're shifting more to hybrids. So that's been a punch in the nose, too. Tesla domestically clearly still the leader here, but continuing to have to cut prices to keep their volumes up. So I think EVs just at a juncture here where we thought adoption would be much higher, but you still have range anxiety by a lot of folks that don't want to make that 100% transition from internal combustion engines and are likely going to take that first step, which is some sort of a hybrid first, and then go full electric when we have a much more robust charging network nationally and automobiles and trucks that can have much longer range.
All right, now let's get to the big question here. Art Hogan, where are you putting money now and or taking it off the table?
I would tell you this, Frank. While all of this excitement's been happening, and NVIDIA is the last of the earnings reporters for the Mag 7, and all of the Mag 7 sort of got in and out of earnings season without getting bounced around too much, I think it's a time the market takes a time to kind of step back. And I would say by stepping back, you want to look at things that haven't worked yet. And typically this is the time that you'd see that rotation. So we still think that there's an opportunity for mean reversion in 4 areas. First, it's energy. Energy's underperformed this year, as is healthcare and as is financials. And I think that those 3 areas likely are going to start to get some sponsorship as we work our way into the end of the first quarter, into the second quarter. I also believe that small caps continue to underperform the large caps. It's the biggest underperformance we've seen in years. You'd have to go all the way back to 2000 to see a larger percentage difference between small caps and large caps. To put a finer point on that, the S&P 500, which is trading at an all-time high, you've got the Russell 2000 that is still 23% below its all-time high. So I think there's just a potential for mean reversion. Folks starting to look at some of those growth companies. It's going to take a continued better economic data, and it's going to take yields not to continue to rise here. So if we get the Treasury curve to settle down a bit here, if the Fed starts cutting rates in June, I think you're going to start to see some mean reversion in some of the underperformers, small caps, energy, financials, and certainly healthcare.
Terrific, Art. Thank you very much for coming to the line here. One of the biggest names on Wall Street. We've been speaking to Art Hogan, Chief Market Strategist at B. Riley Wealth Management, which happens to be based here in Los Angeles. He's also big on Twitter at Arthur Hogan III. We'll be looking for you, Art. Thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon on this record-shattering day.
All right, Frank. Always a pleasure. Talk soon.
Thank you very much. All right, and let's get right out to the freeways now on 790 KABC. Friends, if you've been hurt in an accident, you need an experienced advocate. And Clark Fielding and his team of sharks at Fielding Law are on standby, ready to dive into your case. My friend Clark the Shark is fearless for justice and your go-to attorney when injured in an accident that wasn't your fault. Whether it's a car accident, slip, trip, fall, or any other personal injury, Fielding Law is here to make sure you get the care, attention, and compensation you deserve. Fielding Law can assess the circumstances of the case, negotiate tenaciously with insurance companies, and if necessary, file a lawsuit and litigate to seek fair compensation on behalf of you, the injured party. An injury is a major disruption in your life. Medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, property damage, and other losses incurred as a result of the injury are all part of the damages. Don't try and handle the process alone. You need an expert in the process. The team at Fielding Law are the ones to trust. Put Clark Fielding's number in your phone right now under the word accident. That number, 833-88-SHARK. That's 833-88-SHARK. Or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. Yes, indeed. Fire and Rain, 790 KBC welcomes James Taylor. Coming to the Hollywood Bowl on May 29th. Tickets are on sale Friday at Ticketmaster.com. Right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-795-2222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show. If you're caller 9, call right now, 1-888-790-5222. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. We have a big winner on Wall Street today with both the Dow and the S&P 500 closing at record highs, as we just talked about with market strategist Art Hogan. If you missed any of that, you can bring it up on the Mottek On Money podcast later. The Dow coming in for a closing gain of 457 points, 39,069. The S&P 500 up 105 at 5,087. Both record high closes. And the NASDAQ up 461 points today, settling above 16,042. Briefly hit record high territory for that index during the trading session, is now just a whisker below that. NVIDIA, the star of the show today, and it's better than expected earnings news. It's been, of course, in the spotlight for weeks now leading up to this big day and did not disappoint. NVIDIA up 110.66 at the close to 785.38. Yep, you heard me. Blowing past 700, 785.38 now. Rivian, on the flip side, down 26%. That company lost a quarter of its value on larger than expected quarterly loss. We see the yield in the 10-year note back up to 4.33%. That's the one that impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates, which have also edged higher this week, just below 7%. Gold down $4 at $2,035 and change. Oil down 33 cents, 78.27 a barrel. Bitcoin down about 600 now at 51,306. Ethereum down 15 at 29.69, and Doge at 8 cents. And now the latest news here on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues now here on 790 KABC with crime running rampant in Los Angeles. More attention being focused on the upcoming Los Angeles County District Attorney's contest, where we have about a dozen candidates on the ballot coming up on March 5th. All vying to replace the soft-on-crime incumbent George Gascon. And joining us live now, one of the candidates in the Los Angeles County District Attorney race challenging Gascon for that office. With us now, a violent crime prosecutor. He's Los Angeles Deputy District Attorney Eric Siddall. He participated in the recent United Chambers of Commerce of the San Fernando Valley LA County DA Candidates Forum, which I moderated last week. Eric Siddall, thank you very much for coming to the line here this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you for having me again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for coming to the line here. And take it from the top and tell us why you should be the next Los Angeles County District Attorney.
Well, I'm going to start off by saying what I'm going to do. I'm going to hold criminals accountable again. We're going to rebuild our relationship with law enforcement, and I'm going to rebuild the office. But I'm not just going to rebuild it back to its old numbers of 1,100. I'm going to build it better and smarter so that we're more targeted in terms of dealing with violent crime. We're going to build a division in the district attorney's office that is going to focus on the most prolific criminals that we have in Los Angeles, the repeat offenders. We're going to get them off the streets, and we're going to reduce violent crime and retail crime dramatically by being smarter and more targeted in that approach.
You're speaking to a large business audience here now. We talked about this last week when that report came out showing shoplifting up 81% in Los Angeles, and we've seen one absolutely outrageous video after another where people are stealing from stores. Are any of those cases seeing the light of day in court? Are any of those being prosecuted? And what would you do to turn the situation around out there?
Well, here's the problem. For the past 5 years, crime in this state and this county has been going up, trending upwards, and that's both violent crime and also property crime. One of the main things that we need to do is we need to change Prop 47. That is the proposition that voters passed about a decade ago. And what that proposition did was it prevented us from going after chronic retail thieves. In other words, repeat offenders. So if you commit a retail theft once, you're treated the same on your 100th time. And that is a massive problem because we're not able to actually deal with these repeat offenders. And we need to change Prop 47. We also need to be more aggressive in the way that we charge retail thieves, because right now what we're doing is we're not charging them. We can use conspiracy theories of liability, which makes everything a felony for these types of smash and grab robberies, for example. We're not doing that. And businesses, small businesses in particular, are really seeing the effect of this. I talked to numerous business owners. You know what they all say? They can't get insurance. Their profit margins are being eaten up by thieves. When someone commits an act of vandalism on their business, they can't pay for it. It eats into their lunch and their dinner and their rent and everything else. Their deductibles, not only can they not get insurance, but the ones that can get insurance have seen their rates skyrocket. Their deductibles have skyrocketed. And, I think it's really symbolic for all your listeners who are driving on the 10 freeway or the 110 freeway as you're passing downtown Los Angeles. Look at that tower of failure that is sitting in the middle of downtown LA. It is a big symbol of the absolute failure that is going on in our county and our city, where we have, it graffiti from the top floor all the way down. And the total, complete disrespect for private property that we are seeing right now and for small business owners is appalling. It needs to change, and I'm going to change that.
On there live with Eric Siddall, candidate for Los Angeles County District Attorney. I was just by there today. I was thinking that as well, that indeed not only are stores being taken over these days, not only are intersections being taken over these days, but entire properties being overrun and taken over as we see there with that graffiti tower right in the heart of the city. One thing you mentioned in the forum last week, and you shed light on the homeless issue, which is certainly a big issue here at the moment. You said that you would open a new office within the LA County DA's office related to homelessness, which currently does not exist. Tell us about your idea there.
So it's basically an expansion of a plan that was developed by the city attorney of Redondo Beach. And he was really innovative in his approach. He basically built out a homeless court that deals with homeless individuals from the very beginning to the very end. In other words, it gets them started. It gets them identification so that they can actually be, receive services that we are currently offering, and we are offering a lot of services right now in terms of mental health care and drug addiction. It gives them supportive housing. And the whole purpose of the court is to eventually graduate people to permanent housing. It's a very successful model. It works. It's been a pilot program. It needs to be expanded. From what I understand, the district attorney of LA has zero interest in expanding it. I've heard that he's actually been to the court. I've been there. I think I actually got a tour by the Redondo Beach City Attorney Mike Webb, showed me the success of the program. We can expand it. We can actually be engaged, make a positive impact in terms of nonviolent homeless people who are in our systems, get them out of our system, get them into permanent housing so that they don't, continue to be a blight on our city and actually, potentially cause harm to our residents.
Thank you for shedding light on that important subject as well. Wish we had more time, but we'll have to stop there. We want to wish you all the best. We've been speaking live to Los Angeles Deputy District Attorney now, Eric Siddall, seeking to become the LA County DA here in Los Angeles. Eric Siddall, thank you very much for taking the call this afternoon.
Thank you, as always.
Thank you very much. And right out to the freeways now, 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KABC. Good afternoon. We are doing it live in the 4 o'clock hour here. Mottek On Money, 790 KABC, live on the air, streaming live too, live online, KBC.com, and that on-demand Mottek On Money podcast at KBC.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Damage assessment continues in Los Angeles County following the most recent storm, the one that hit last couple of days. We got a beautiful evening here, beautiful night for an evening, folks. Some homes and businesses, though, were severely damaged in what's been happening lately. What happens when a property is red tagged? What happens to the value and the taxes and the whole works? Is there any relief in those situations, which so many people are facing right now? Let's bring in the L.A. County Assessor, Jeffrey Prang. Assessor, thank you very much for coming to the line. It's been a while since we've chatted behind a live microphone, so it's great to have you with us here once again. And give us your assessment of what's happening out there.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to our listeners about what we can do to help anybody whose property has been significantly damaged by the recent rains and mudslides. So there is property tax relief available if your property has been damaged. And there's a few conditions. You have to have at least $10,000 in damage. You have to apply within 1 year. And we will reduce the assessed value of your property for tax purposes until such time as you effect repairs. There is also another program under a fairly new measure that was adopted by the voters back in 2020 called Proposition 19. That is, if your property was destroyed and you want to move to a new property, you can transfer your low tax base to the new property without being reassessed at the higher tax rate at market value.
And that was one of the good parts of Prop 19, right? The other part is creating a heartbreak, but that's something that we haven't talked that much about. This good part of Prop 19, which many people will probably have to utilize at this point.
Fortunately, Los Angeles County was not as heavily hit as some other counties. From some of the recent storms back in November, we had 23 applications. December, there were 19. January, 20, and so far in February, there's only 4. So it's not huge numbers. Although if you are one of those properties that was impacted, it doesn't matter whether it's a big number or small number. It hits close to home. So we've been working closely with first responders, with the fire department, with municipalities, to try to proactively identify those homeowners who have been impacted, and we will proactively apply property tax relief to them. We did that most recently over in Rolling Hills Estates when those dozen homes or so slid down the hill.
Right, and any estimate of how many properties have been affected by the most recent storms this year?
So it doesn't seem like it's more than a couple dozen, not a huge number, although as we have seen over in Portuguese Bend on the Palos Verdes Peninsula, all of the rain has softened a lot of the hillsides, so it's still possible that some of those properties may continue to be impacted, and we're keeping a close eye on what's happening there to see if we can be of service.
That's excellent. We're speaking live to Jeffrey Prang, the Los Angeles County Assessor. And for anyone that wants more information about those various programs you mentioned and any relief that might be available at this point, and any other information about what's happening in your office, what's the best way for them to access that?
There's two ways. They can go to our website at assessor.lacounty.gov or give us a call at 213-974-8658. That's 213-974-8658.
On the air live with Assessor Jeffrey Prang, and while we have you on the line, looks like property values continue to climb here in Southern California. Real estate people will tell you, especially on a day like this, that really all real estate here in Los Angeles is free. What you pay for is the weather. We can say that today now that we have a beautiful clear sky for the most part here in Southern California. But what are your observations here and what's happening in residential and, by the way, commercial real estate as well?
So there's a little bit of a mixed bag. Overall, property values still seem to be remaining strong and are moving in an upward trajectory. residential property in particular. There are some caveats to that. Residential homes are still strong in terms of their value, although there's not as many sales. A lot of sales tend to be on the middle to higher level value homes, but it's still a relatively strong market. The commercial and industrial sector is particularly noteworthy in the downtown office space. Things have slowed down. There are, I'm sure you've read the news that there's some major buildings downtown that sold recently that are selling at, in some cases, a significant reduction from what they last sold at, including the old, used to be known as the First Interstate building, had sold, I think, for about $400 million back in 2016, and just sold again for $200 million, about a 50% reduction. Office.
Assessor, thank you very much. I wish we had more time, but we'll have to stop there. Thank you very much for taking the call here. That is Jeffrey Prang, the Los Angeles County Assessor. Stocks hitting record highs today. Both the Dow and the S&P 500 closed at record highs. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang. And tune in again tomorrow afternoon at 4 for Mottek On Money here on 790 KBC.
The Ed Milet Show showcases the greatest peak performers sharing their journey, knowledge, and thought leadership.
This is one of the all-time best pieces of advice ever given on the show.
Author and coach Tony Robbins.
You don't experience life. You experience the life you focus on.
Singer Jason Derulo.
My happiest moments have always been in the grind.
Singer Jewel.
I think healing is a gritty job. It's you looking in the mirror and going, what do I got? No one's coming for me. I'm coming for me.
The Ed Milet Show is available on YouTube or wherever you listen.